the outer me, when we show the world at large. And then there's the truth.
Hello lovelies, today we're taking a look at a game called Streets of Peril by Broken Blade Publishing. It's a relatively slim volume for today's RPGs, weighing in at about 170 pages, hardback. It's an interesting little game, but it has some identity problems. I guess you could say it doesn't seem to know quite exactly what it is. It has a very old school play feel. It uses dice pools in a way that is reminiscent of early editions of Victoriana or Storyteller games. And its setting and background is more of a sort of Renaissance setting that is reminiscent of Warhammer. So it's a whole bunch of different things brought together in a sort of Frankenstein's monster sort of game. And it's the sort of thing we used to call a fantasy heartbreaker, except not for D&D. And it doesn't have its own strong individual identity, and it suffers from that a little bit. So the setting is a Renaissance one, but that covers a lot of ground, whether you're talking about the original Italian Renaissance right through to the English Renaissance. It could be anywhere from the 1400s through to the 1600s or even later. It is a fantastical version thereof, so there are monsters and undead and magic, but there's also weird technology and so on, which puts it perhaps a little bit more into the kind of old hammer sort of vibe, but more the war game than the role-playing game in terms of the technology and so on. The artwork's pretty good, the layout is fairly straightforward but a bit cramped. We have nice black and white spot artwork, and we have stuff that is in a more period style in terms of paintings here and there throughout. The setting is one that brings to mind yet another game, Seventh Sea, in that you have city-states and areas which are obviously, reminiscent of that same sort of period in European history, and an emphasis on things like duelists and so on. That brings to mind that kind of swashbuckling musketeer sort of thing. So there are analogues to Venice and analogues to the United Kingdom and so on. It is a class-based system, so your character is defined through various statistics: might, toughness, agility, willpower, intelligence, and fate. So again, that brings to mind Warhammer in a lot of ways, though missing a bunch of statistics, so somewhat simpler. And the dice pools are going to be smaller, generally ranging from 1 to 4. Characters start with 1 exceptional statistic at 4, 2 rank 3 statistics, 2 rank 2 statistics, and 1 rank 1 statistic. So it's up to you how you position those. Your different culture that you come from, what do they call it here? Lineage. Since it's all humans, that's not really a problem. Unless you count changelings as fae, which I guess you could. So you have that, but there are also other aspects as well as culture that you can choose instead, like commoner, highborn, and so on. It's whichever one most defines your character. That will give you some additional traits of one kind or another, sometimes skill ranks and things. You also define your character by their ambitions, which is nice because it gives characters something to do straight off. And then it does use classes, which I'm not hugely a fan of, but some people like classes for like niche protection and so on. So you have classes like Brute, Cultist, Duelist, and so on, with subclasses as well, so you can further subdefine like that. But the experience system is fairly open. So rather than levels, you can raise whatever statistics and so on that you want. So again, this has this Frankenstein quality, because typically you pair a class system with a level system and you would advance in the class as you went forward. Here, class is more your starting point and what special abilities you want to have access to, and you then move forward from there. You can also define your character with special traits. These are roughly analogous to feats and so on in other systems. These are special exceptions and bonuses that your character has. If you're familiar with dice pool systems, the way this sort of thing works will be fairly familiar to you. There are quite a lot of these, but there's definitely room for more, and customizability is relatively easy if you're a game hacker. Rules are fairly simple. You form a dice pool, so have a dexterity of 3 and a sword skill of 2. Take those together. 4, 5s, or 6s are successes. Well, I just failed horribly. That's with standard dice. You're going to need 3 different colours of dice. So normally it's going to be 4, 5, or 6 for a success. If you have the I think it's black dice, then it's 3 to 6, so that would be 3 successes. And if you have red dice, it's 2 to 6. So those are all a success. And so it goes, and so it goes, and so it goes. So the more successes, the better. You're rolling against difficulties, and furthermore, dice typically explode. So you will always have a chance of accomplishing something, no matter the difficulty. Which helps deal with the problem that some of these dice pool systems have. Like if you have a total stat plus skill of 3 and you're trying to do something that's a difficulty of 4, you need 4 successes, you're not normally going to be able to get that. Oh, an on-camera 666. I'll save that for statistics for a D&D character. Okay, but in that instance, you might be able to succeed because you're going to have the exploding dice and you're able to carry on. So that helps. There's a whole plethora of skills. Those all work fine. There's plenty of combat rules and so on. They did have a historical consultant named Brittany Reeves, and they seem to have paid attention to HEMA and various other things, but also over and above that, they have given primacy to making it playable. So you're not necessarily given choice paralysis, and the relative number of successes and so on gives the games master plenty of scope to make on the spot rulings about various things. It is quite deadly, so that's where that old school feel comes in. Characters are going to need to be careful, try and work things so that they have the advantage. You can suffer truly horrible crippling injuries and so on. So again, that's where that Warhammer feel comes back in. There is plenty of equipment, rules around that for haggling, trading, and so on. Different weapons have different capabilities and statistics. There are firearms, though they're fairly loosely defined. They could be anything from a matchlock to a flintlock, and all points in between. It doesn't make that much difference so far as the game rules are concerned. So again, easily hackable and customizable. You could use this to play Whitechester if you so wished. Though it's not an open system, I don't think, so I can't make a conversion book for you. I could do some kind of fan conversion, but that would be that. Armor soaks damage, so if I was stabbed in the chest with a sword, and I was wearing a heavy leather doublet or something, I could roll 2 dice to try and stop the damage. Oh, and I didn't manage to stop any at all, so yeah, I'm screwed. So fairly simple. A soak roll is going to be familiar to anyone who's played Storyteller, and so on. The technology is the part where I felt that it was kind of out of keeping. The magic isn't out of keeping. That feels somewhat suppressed, though it can still be powerful, but it's important enough that it's useful in the game. But the technology side felt a little bit overpowered and out of keeping with the rest of the game. It just didn't feel quite like it fit. Like it should have been toned down a certain amount, and that would have made more sense to me. There are magic items, but again, they tend to be lower key. It's just the technology where I felt that it went off the rails a little bit. There's some general kind of generic GM advice. It's useful enough. Random encounter tables, do those make sense? Not always, but you know, you can fiddle around with that and change it. It is useful advice, but how realistically, how many people is this going to be their first game? You know, so in a lot of cases, when it's a role-playing game that's marketed to people who are already role players, that can feel like wasted space. There is background information, but it's a little bit scant. I wasn't necessarily left with a particularly lasting impression of what the world was really like, what the culture was really like. It does tap into certain tropes, so if you're familiar with certain things, you don't need to pay that much attention to the background, but it failed to distinguish itself and be memorable in and of itself. Not necessarily a bad thing. Generic tropes and so on are easy for people to pick up on, but when you look at the kind of things that this is competing with, that lack of identity is probably the singular biggest weakness in the game and in the book. The bestiary is nice. You've got weird stuff. I got the feeling reading through, though this may be my own personal bias, that it was best to concentrate on sort of demons, undead, and traditional mythological creatures, as well as cults and intrigue. That would be where the best campaign would emerge, I felt. Certain things like giants feel a little bit out of place in that kind of setting, but your mileage may vary. As I say, that may just be my bias, but a human-centric with supernatural aspects, undead aspects like vampires and so on, that would be where I would angle a game or a campaign for this. You do have an adventure with it. Again, as per usual, I usually feel like this is a bit of a waste of space in books, and should maybe perhaps be published separately at a fairly low price as an introductory adventure. In this one, I'm not giving away much, I guess. It's Frankenstein's monster, but the scientist is called Finkelstein, and obviously the setting being more of a Renaissance one, it feels a bit earlier, but that shows the kind of emphasis that they want to put on the strange science and so on. An index, which is always nice. So this is a difficult one because, like I say, it doesn't really have a strong identity of its own. It's like a fantasy heartbreaker for Warhammer, and thus it's competing against Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and perhaps a little bit Lamentations of the Flame Princess. You could easily, run LOTFP stuff using this system with a little bit of conversion. It wouldn't take too much work, but it really lacks its own strong identity. The background, the setting doesn't make a huge impact. The most characterful illustrations are the monsters, but that didn't leave me with much of a feel necessarily about what I would be doing as an adventurer in this world. At 170 pages, it's smaller than a lot of modern games. That is good in many ways, makes it a bit more affordable and less of a hefty tome to carry around. Looking at the website, there's no supplementary material yet, though this was first published in 2021, I believe. You can get the rules system for free. It's called Perilous D6, I believe. So, I mean, we have a decent edition of Warhammer now, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, that is perhaps less intuitive than a dice pool system. So, you might prefer a dice pool system, in which case you might choose this. It's also competing with Zweihander, which is just a rip-off of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay and run by a dick. So these people deserve your support more than them. But that's not a good basis upon which to buy games. It's difficult because I want to be encouraging, and this is a competently produced, decent game. It just really lacks its own individuated identity. I think it needs support material to make up for the lack in this core book, and to help really give it that identity, both artistically and in terms of the writing. In terms of style, the art's good. It's slightly cartoony, so maybe if you're looking for a kinder, gentler Warhammer, that might appeal to you. Dice pools are intuitive, so it's good for new players. The layout feels a bit tight and could be a bit more characterful again. It's a full colour book, but most of it is in black and white, so maybe a budget edition, soft cover, black and white throughout, would be a good thing to do. The artwork's good, decent. It's just, again, that the problem is that it lacks that really strong identity. So in terms of style, a high 3. In terms of substance, you've got a lot there. You've got the complete system, you've got a decent bestiary. Where it falls down a bit is in describing the setting. So again, that's going to be a high 3. So we're looking at 6 to 7 out of 10, maybe 3.5 out of 5. There is a solid basis for a decent game here. If you like Warhammer but don't like the system, and you don't want to give Daniel Fox any money, then Streets of Peril is a good bet. I hope that they will move forward with a second edition and really strengthen the identity of the game, or put out some supplementary material that puts some meat on the bones. At the moment, I think it would be most worthwhile to someone who wants to run a game in a setting anywhere from the 14th century through to the 17th century, but lacks a system to do it with. If it was an open system, I think it might appeal to a lot of people. If you're someone who loves the aesthetic of something like Lamentations but doesn't like D&D cloned rules, then this would be a good system to go to. But you can get the system separate for free, so I don't know, it's tricky. I don't want to be too discouraging, I want to be encouraging. This is promising as a first output. It just needs that certain je ne sais quoi to make it stand out. It needs a USP. Sang.
Colony Moon is a cooperative or competitive story game about founding a moon colony, making it succeed and opening up the rest of the solar system for exploration. Players take on the parts of the board and make decisions about the future of the colony, expending political capital and gaining prestige when their plans work. Available at post-mort.com, lulu.com for print, and drive-through RPG.